Thank you for having me. What a privilege. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing some art that we get to look at and talk about a little bit
Yes.
today,
Yes.
and appreciate you sharing some time and expertise. How long have you been here at Grace?
I am going into my 12th year at Grace. So
Great.
yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
thank you for what you've done to build the
Thank you.
program, and we're even going to talk about some of the exciting new things
Yes.
that you've started as well. Let's go back to the beginning. Tell us a little bit about, art in your childhood, and how you got excited and interested in art.
Sure. Well, thank you again so much for having me.
Yeah.
Was really one of those little kids that was creative in a way I think that others didn't really understand, except for my one grandmother who now, as time has passed, we realize that the word eccentric is probably not the right word for her. Hoarder and grandchildren lover is probably the better word. So it was just really, as a kid, I just was so fascinated by colors, and I would, take like grape juice and kind of mix it in ice cream, and it was always really special because
Sounds tasty too,
it was really tasty. But so with my grandma on my other side, that was at a time when they would fix the communion trays, and I knew I always got to like do what I could with the grape juice after we had communion. So it was always an opportunity, really at both sets of grandparents to, whether it was coloring or just painting. And my one grandmother, who was the eccentric one, we could get in her old Cadillac, sit in the back seat. We could make a peanut butter jelly sandwich.
Mm.
We could draw, we could paint, because she had everything fixed up for the grandkids.
Oh, wow.
So that was really just a wonderful environment where I could be creative, and really nobody cared, So it was just really fun because she thought her grandchildren were perfect. So whatever they do was perfect. Whether she really understood what I was doing or not, I don't know. But yeah, it was really fun.
I was the kid after communion that was running around seeing if I could collect more cups than all of my friends.
Oh, yes, yes.
You were the one actually thinking, what productive thing could I actually do with the leftover grape juice? That's wow, fascinating.
Yes.
When did you sort of make or when did the idea emerge of like, I could make a career out of teaching, doing art in some form or fashion?
Well, I think it was, I always knew I wanted to be an artist, but I was called an artist when I was little, but I don't think I really understood what all was available until I was in high school. And then my high school teacher had actually suggested that I get a job at a local printing company. And so that was my first job out of high school in the arts. So I worked at the drawing board, where actually, you used pen and ink and whiteout, and you did the acetate overlays at a catalog company. And so from there, it was just really knowing that I loved education. I loved learning more about art, and so I just going in that direction with my undergrad, and then I'm a lover of education.
You have a lot of initials after your MFA, MBA, BFA. It goes on and on.
Yes. Yeah.
So I have a son who is artistic, who loves to draw, mainly right now. He's about 10 years old. And I will be the first to admit, I love the music arts, but visual arts has never been my expertise. I love to observe it, but I'm not very good at it, or at least that's my interpretation of myself. What could I do, or what do you suggest for parents with artistic kids to sort of fuel that flame of interest in the arts?
I think, first of all, let them color outside of the lines. So that would be my first recommendation. But I think anytime that they're putting their imagination to use, whatever it is, and sometimes it'll be in ways that you're trying to understand, why are they doing that? How does that make sense? Just to continually encourage that, because every artist has just a different way of working. Some are process, some want to hurry up and get to the end of their product. And so I would just really encourage them. And then especially not only for their own art making, but to see art by others. So whether it's an older, whether it's a high school student or a college student at Grace, to be able to have them have a mentor, have them go into classrooms where they have that opportunity to paint or to draw and see what that's like. The other thing that I would recommend is to buy them the most expensive paints, but non-toxic paints and brushes that you can, because a lot of times with little people, people will say, well, let's just get these little cheap brushes,
Sure.
and then the little, the little hairs fall out, and then the children are frustrated because their brushes aren't working. So I would just really recommend just whatever way, and even if it's like whether it's cake making or sewing or any kind of craft, or dragging things in from the outdoors, just to let them continually put things together. So
that's interesting. Yeah. So he likes cooking too.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I ever made the correlation between, oh, he always wants to help in the kitchen and he loves art. But there probably is one there.
There is. It's that taking all of these different kind of pieces of the pie or pieces of the puzzle, and you're putting them together for this aesthetic end result, which is really, I have students, we just had a prospective student the other day that was talking about, I love photography, I love drawing and painting, I love crafting, I love sewing, I love cooking. And it was just like all of these things are creative ways, interior design. So once you have that vision, it's a vision for everything in your world, no matter what it is. So
what one of the things I find very interesting about you and your career is, you've also been in the corporate world and successful in the corporate world. You have an MBA, you've worked with Fortune 500 companies. So talk about kind of being in that environment as an artist, and the skills you learned as an artistic person, how it applied in, big business, let's say, where there was, deadlines and it wasn't just you get to paint outside the lines. Tell us a little bit about that part of your career.
All right, thank you. That's a great question. One of the things that I really, really enjoyed about my career is that you get to still be very, very creative, and you're kind of defining within a rectangle, right? Whether it's a brochure, a flyer, a trade show graphic. And the idea that you can communicate visually, so you're whether it's with product managers or you're working with the legal department or HR, for the things that they're creating, you can draw out, so that helps them see what that vision is, because a lot of others that you're working with aren't necessarily creative, and so you have that opportunity to use that art. And again, whether you're trying to just draw little stick figures so they can understand what you're doing, it really helps them understand what that journey is. And then I think the other thing that has always been, I think a gift is just that idea to be a visionary. So when you're developing budgets and you're developing, schedules for your your colleagues or the people that you're responsible for, you have that vision of, okay, here's plan A, here's plan B, and then you can put that together with what your vice president wants, or what the CEO is charging the whole company with doing. But I really think that it has to do with being able, again, to see all of those connections, why it's important that you as a designer can move within these different people groups, because you get to be the communicator. And as an artist, you're invited to the table to have ideas. And I always tell my students, if you don't have ideas, if you're too maybe afraid to share an idea, you won't be invited to the table. So it's always best to kind of go to the meeting and have maybe have 5 or 10 ideas, and if one's used, fine. If none are used, fine. People will always love to invite you, because you can brainstorm with them.
I that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I know on my end, working with artists and graphic designers, they are often able to put the pieces together. Like, I'm throwing out lots of ideas, and they're able to put it together and then elevate it beyond what I could imagine. And so you get back this piece and you're like, yes, that's what I was trying to say or think about, but you were able to actually put it together for me in a way that I couldn't. That's an amazing gift that artists have for us. What about coming to Grace College? So you're in the corporate world, and why did you decide, okay, I'm going to try the academic route and come and be a professor of all things art at Grace College?
Well, it was kind of an interesting journey. So I was born and raised in this area and had worked in the industry and at Biomet. I'd worked there for 7 years. And then we were going to kind of take a life intermission and go to California. And then after 3 months, I said to my husband, well, I love you, but I got to go back to work. Like, I'm not enjoying this time off here. So it was actually hired at a medical device company who was a former VP with Biomet. And then from there was invited to go to another medical device company. And so we were in California for 9 years. And our daughter had moved out there after she had graduated from Purdue. And then we were kind of thinking about like maybe, coming back to Indiana. I think our heartstrings were kind of pulling us back. And in the meantime, when we were out there is when I got my MFA. And I think that for me was really life transformational. And I'll get back to get Grace in a minute, but I think when I wanted to get my MFA, again, I just wanted to be a better artist. I wanted to be a better painter. I wanted to be a better designer. And because I think because I went to a Christian university, it was so transformational because my professors saw in me ways that they could help me grow spiritually. So I was called out. I've just shared this with my students the other day, but I was called out by one of my professors who said, you have to stop working so fast. You have to stop when you're making art, because I was making multiples. I tend to work in a series. And he said, you have to set a timer to stop, because if you're using your studio as a place for prayer and a practice of prayer, it seems to me you're blowing through your prayer time. And it was like, it gives me chills now to think about it. And I try to share that with my students, because I think it was the first time that I felt like I didn't have to make so much production in with a deadline. So because I'd always work with deadlines, I'm all about deadlines. And then I had another professor who said, every time you use the word assembly line, it just makes my toes curl. Because I was talking about, okay, I'm making my art, I got my watercolors going, I got my assembly line going. He's like, Kim, stop saying that, So what was happening is I was seeing, and I loved my undergrad. I loved my undergrad. I loved my MBA. My MBA was from Indiana Wesleyan, and my undergrad was from Indiana University. And I loved both of those programs as well. But for me, it was really in the visual arts at a Christian university that, for me, was very transformational in ways that I was not expecting. So when we were kind of thinking about, let's kind of think about moving back to Indiana, the position actually opened up because of the passing of the previous chair. And so that's how I ended up coming to Grace, is I actually came for an interview in December. And I went back to California and I said, I knew I was back home when I walked on the Grace campus, and all of the people were wearing reindeer sweatshirts. So I knew I was back home again. So that's how I ended up coming here. Wow. And at that time, Bill Cadup was the provost, and I had taught one class for Indiana Wesleyan after I'd got my MBA. But I had a lot of experience, of course, a career designer and marketing communications manager. So I had managed budgets and had, worked with multiple different people groups and all different kinds of settings, and loved mentoring. In fact, I had mentored 2 students that had graduated from Grace that came to work at Biomet, who I love to this day. They're just amazing. And so that was really kind of how I ended up, coming at Grace. So I think there were all of these little pieces, of the journey that would already kind of maybe pre-planned for me to end up.
Thank you for sharing.
So, yeah,
appreciate that.
Yeah.
You talked about something I wanted to ask about, and that was, how your art and your Christian faith work together. What does that look like and mean for you, and how do you express that to your students when you're talking about art and your faith in God?
Thank you. I think that's a great question. I think what happens is my like whatever whatever I'm going through, whatever I'm praying about, whatever I'm concerned about or worried about, and I'm making, it all shows up in that making. And so I think that's what being authentic artist is, or authentic person, because there are things that I may be thinking about or things that I'm concerned about, and whatever I'm making, that's kind of what's coming to fruition. So, for example, when we lived in California, we spent a lot of time in LA going back and forth because that's where our daughter lived. And I was just so intrigued and just what would be the word, or even dismayed or just worried about different women I would see on the streets of Hollywood. And so from that, I photographed doorways and printed them out on watercolor paper and then watercolored them and then created these female soft sculpture dolls, and then did an installation of that. And that was one of the first installations I done here. But I had different women especially come to me and say when they saw this work, they were just so moved by it. Well, I had cried when I was making the work, but I didn't anticipate somebody else having those same feelings. And it's much like the work that's actually in our art gallery now, or the work that I brought to share of some of the other artists that will be in our art gallery now, or that is in our art gallery now, and then will be on this next session. But what I'm finding is, as I'm reaching out to different artists, just even to talk with them about grace, so I'm reaching out to them as an artist or as a teacher, I'm finding that just opening a dialogue, they're introduced to grace, or they're introduced to my faith, or they're introduced to my care of my students, or my care for art, and what I'm interested in making. So it really becomes your whole person. I think it's like a musician who, they're writing a composition based on what their view of is the world, and that lens is through their faith. So you see that in their art. And I think that's, what poets do, what, right. What writers do. And that
becomes a vehicle for you to express your emotions, but then also to share what God is doing.
Yes.
And even share your faith through that medium of the
yes.
of the art piece of,
yes.
Why did you create that and what does it mean? And then it means something to others as well. That's really neat.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit in there about, I think, traditional and digital art forms and how you merge them.
Yes.
That's kind of your thing. So
yes.
Tell me, how'd you come up with that, and what does that mean and look like? That's sort of your style. Tell us a little bit about your style.
Well, that also came out of, unbeknownst to me, that came out of when I was working in my MFA program. Because as a digital designer, as a graphic designer, I was fortunate to began at the drawing board. Everything was manual, right? So that was in the 80s and 90s, so digital technology was just coming about. So I had the wonderful privilege of being able to be in the dark room with the printer and work in a print shop and all of those things that you did manually. Well, then when the digital technology came out, for me it was really exciting. So you would use brushes and tools in the digital world just like you do at your drawing board. So a lot of the way the software is set up now is based on those traditional methods, but students now don't really realize that. They see the dodger and the burner, and those kind of things, those tools, but they don't realize that's because it was a darkroom technique, So what happened in my MFA is that I was, again, photographing these doorways and in all different places that we had traveled, and I wasn't sure what to do with them because I just had so many of them. And so one of my professors had suggested stitching them, like just putting them under the sewing machine, just stitching around the doorways. So then what happened is, because I was watercoloring them as well, on the back side of these little pieces of watercolor paper, and I was stitching them, and then I let these long strings hang down. There was a whole nother visual occurrence that was taking place on the back side of the watercolor paper. So you would see the stitches with these different colors. And then, so from that, they were kind of small works. Then I started, I've always enjoyed working large, but I was gessoing canvas. And because I was in a hurry, probably just, I probably didn't set my timer that day to stop. But so I was using acrylic paint on the end of a 4-foot brush, and I was just like, painting away. And then I thought, I'm going to look what the back side looks like. And so I turned the canvas over, and it became a whole series of artworks where I would paint the front, turn the canvas on the back side. And so part of that really had to do with, there's beautiful things that happen even though they're out of our control, right? So I wasn't seeing exactly what was happening on the back side, but still my attempt was making these beautiful colors bleed through, and it was making these beautiful works of art. So I just ended up then, using the camera, photography, going into the digital software to, shift colors and adjust colors through gradation. And then I would print out works on photo paper, and then have over 700 little, 4x6 photos as divided from like one large photo. Yeah. So it was really a way that I've enjoyed working. So I enjoy working just painting. I enjoy ripping and tearing canvas. I enjoy doing digital work. So that's really
putting
kind of what that combination is. So yeah, I really enjoy all of those different ways of working.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, that was a process of discovery.
It was a process of discovery. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you brought a couple show and tell for us.
I did.
That's one thing we do in art, right? We show and tell.
Absolutely.
And the first piece here is with the current display in the art gallery here, right?
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about what you have, the artist, and what's currently going on in Mount Memorial.
Yes, I'm so excited. Thank you so much. So this is one piece of over 200 and some glass containers that are in the art gallery right now. The artist's name is Mark Bleschenski. He's from Michigan. I first saw his work in 2016. Actually, it was an art prize, which is an international art competition, one of the largest in the world. And his work was in the Fountain Street Church. And as a stained glass artist, he had this whole display of these containers that looked kind of wonky, kind of just distorted, and some of them were a little bent over like this. But what the work really had to do with, if you were, walked up to it, and it took a little while for you to figure it out, is that it really had to do with the Flint, Michigan water crisis. Because as somebody who lives an hour north of Flint, he was so concerned about what he was seeing on the news, and he wanted to address, not in a political way, but in an aesthetic way, what was taking place. And so he created this work, and all of the artworks have a label on, and they're the actual statistics of the lead in the water, the tap water analysis done by Virginia Tech University. And so it's a way that artists work in a non-confrontational manner, where you have this gentle work of art, you have these glassware sitting on the shelves, and it allows the viewer to come in and engage with the work. And it was this work that for me was really profound, because I had heard about the situation in Flint, just being in Northeast Indiana, but until I saw this work, I didn't realize the gravity of the situation. And I had reached out to him and said, could I ask you more questions about your work? And then it began a friendship, and now his artwork is here in the gallery.
That's
he
awesome.
makes a lot of other work. He's making artwork that has to do with, it's called like interventionist art, where he has this beautiful display in the gallery that it's really meant for the landscape, that he'll put it in like for a day or two, photograph it, see people's reaction, and put it in locations whether it's near like the sand dunes in Michigan or in the a farmland. But it's just a way of working where an artist is looking at a social situation and they're trying to use their own way of art making in order to say, here's a concern, or here's something that I'm thinking about, and it invites others to think about that as well.
Really
so
neat.
His name again is Mark Bleschenski. His work is here till October 14th.
So if somebody wanted to come see it, is there opportunities to come visit?
Yes. So in the art gallery, we're open Monday through Friday, usually around 10:30 till 5. Sometimes I open it at 7 in the mornings when I come in. But yeah, so anybody could come into Grace Campus. It's on the second floor. It's called the first floor of Mount Memorial. It's not the ground level, but it's the second floor up. But they're more than welcome to come in and take a look at his beautiful work. So he did 4 artist talks yesterday. So he did 3 with students from the classrooms, and then he did an artist talk last night at 7, and it was just well attended by students, and it was really lovely.
That's great.
And then the next artwork we're having in the gallery. Should I pull this up?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So the next artwork that we're having in the art gallery is by an artist named Brenda Miller. We're going to have a series of what she calls her ecology collages. This is the Bridge series. This is called Bridge 5, Line 5. So if you know anything about Line 5, what this is under the Straits of Mackinac, there is a pipeline called Line 5. And it was laid in like the 1950s. It's operating under an expired contract now. And so I'll just say, just briefly, there's been like 33 oil leaks of that pipeline since its installation. Well, Brenda had worked on Mackinac Island as a teen. She's also a Michigan raised artist, and her work is from old vintage maps. So as a artist, both Mark and Brenda are very interested in the environment. They're very interested in the ecology, and her work is just this beautiful, beautiful, like a tapestry, almost like a patchwork quilt. But what her concern is for the fresh water. Like the Great Lakes are the largest freshwater system in the world. And then they have this challenge of political litigation for the pipeline that is really no longer safe. But again, as an artist, she's lovely. She's like just so soft-spoken. She is so sweet. And she does these collages from old vintage maps, and it's very, very precise and just the most gentlest spirit ever. But it's a way, again, for an artist to be able to bring attention to what their concerns are. So when I had first been introduced to her work, I had reached out to her and I said, "Hi, you don't know me, but I would really like to talk with you about your work." And so her work, we'll probably have maybe 10 or 13 pieces or so of her work in the gallery starting October 19th.
You said maps, so
maps.
So she's taking maps,
like books of atlases and old vintage maps. So
is that made of maps?
Yeah. So actually, this one here in the center is actually called London Poverty Map. And early in the 1900s, a gentleman was trying to determine the economic level of different people groups in London. So, and then the different other areas, sometimes like a lot of the flourishes you see are actually from old maps, old atlases that have these beautiful flourishes and embellishments. She has one that I was going to bring and I didn't, but it's called Turtle Island, and it's a lovely, lovely work, a little bit larger than this, but the whole turtle is shaped from old maps of Michigan and embellishes from the old maps, so from the late 1800s. And she says it's always hard for her to make that first cut into it, but then what she does, she's good. Like she keeps going. So this is an example of the ecology art. So this would be kind of a general term for ecology art, where artists are concerned about ecology, concerned about our environment, but they're not out on the street protesting, or doing, posters kind of as a, trying to have somebody hear what their voice is. Another artwork I'm actually wearing, I just want to give a brief plug for this, but this is by a Native American artist called Kelly. Her name is Kelly Church. Her and her daughter make baskets, and so the heritage from the Native Americans, the basket making from her family has been from the black ash tree. The black ash tree is almost devastated in the U.S. because of the emerald ash borer. It came to America.
Taking out one of my trees, yes.
Yes. And so, because when it came to America, our trees didn't have the immune system for that. But so as an artist, an educator, and just somebody who's an advocate for, Native American arts and traditional art, she makes all kinds of, like whether it's bracelets or baskets. Her work is in the Smithsonian Institute. It's actually in Grand Rapids right now. We're taking some students up to Grand Rapids next Tuesday to do a tour of the art museum and actually take a look at her work. So I've reached out to her, and she's been just so gracious and just talking with me and sharing with me her story. So if you see a bracelet, or you see, a little jar of water, or you see an artwork like this, you don't necessarily realize that this is the eco art. These are artists concerned about how we make a sustainable future, how are we caring for our land, and that's really through the research of and talking with artists is how we developed in our department the eco art major.
Yes, which is a new major this year, right?
Yes.
The eco art major.
Yes. And Nate Bosch, Dr. Nate Bosch and Dr. Jared Burkholder were so gracious when I had reached out to them and like this idea, they're like, sure, so the eco art major is actually about half of the courses are the visual arts courses, half of the courses are the ecology based courses in environmental studies, and there's a couple courses in the local and national government, and then there's a sociology course that you can take as well. So right now we have one student who is an eco art minor. She's a senior this year, and she's an environmental studies major, a photography minor, and she's like, Prof. Reiff, I have to do this. So she's actually working on a documentary right now. Can I say her name?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Marissa Hurst. So she is actually working on a documentary. She's going out with Dr. Bosch in the 5 different wetlands, and then we have kind of this plan for, she's already scripted her documentary, but it really has to do with preparing information for future Gray students in the program. So she's
really
doing
neat.
an amazing job.
So she's doing art that hopefully will promote the program.
Yes,
and so the whole idea is, and Dr. Bosch often talks about the need for us to care for God's creation.
Yes.
And so it's a way of expressing that through different mediums.
Yes.
Of whether it's concerns or advocacy, but you kind of said it like soft advocacy, right?
Yes.
It's not. It's through a medium that's supposed to get you to think and ponder.
Yeah.
That's really neat. Really neat.
And there's different kinds of eco art or eco art. There's representation, there's advocacy, and so there's different ways that art can be used, whether it's community, maybe a community comes together and they develop this garden that's also beautiful location to spend time. So there's a lot of different ways that could be used. Reclamation is another term that's used in urban areas that they're trying to design, and they work with architects for different redeveloping areas that are conscientious about the environment.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing. I mean, I know that's just one of your programs, and there are so many others that we could spend time discussing as well. But I appreciate you taking the time to share your story and to share about what's going on in the gallery that, again, you can come visit.
Yes.
And if people wanted to learn more about you and about your art, what's the best way to find out about you?
Well, you can go to kimmreiff.com. I do have a website. So there are different examples of my work there. So my large canvas pieces, I have a Venice series, and you can see when you look that I have a series of a variety of things. So it does have some of the digital work. It has the doorways in Hollywood, where I had titled that work Pretty Woman. So you can go see my website. So
there you go.
I need to update
Reiff.
it. kimmreiff.com. Yeah,
Awesome.
but I do need to update it. So
and then of course you can go to the Grace website and find
website.
more about the different majors within the art program as well.
Sure.
Good.
And students or prospective students, families, I mean, people could come into any of my classes and sit in my classes just to see, what is happening in there. Just if they're interested, we do have silver scholars that are in the classes, which I'm so excited about as well. So there's just a variety of ways.
And you have probably one of my favorite spots on campus where not the art gallery, that's a beautiful spot too, but the art studio, yes. Oh man, phenomenal. What a wonderful spot on campus. So if you are ever on campus, make sure you stop by and check out that space as well.
Yes.
Well, thank you. Anything else you want to make sure you share?
I just want to say thank you, and it's fun to be here because I have a former student over here to my left, and so I'm so glad to see Chingiz here. So yeah, it's just really lovely to be here, and I'm just really but I must say I have not got a reindeer sweatshirt, just so you know. So but anyway,
we'll have to make that happen to make it official.
So.
Well, Chingiz's job, his artistry here is to make us sound good and look good. So that'll be his job via the podcast.
All right.
And thank you for listening to the Grace Story podcast today. Appreciate Dr. Wally Brath for providing the music for us, Associate Professor of Worship Arts here. And also thank you to Chingiz and Rick, our associate producers, for today putting together this podcast. And please share or like and comment on this podcast wherever you retrieved it from. Until next time, live your best Grace Story today.